Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome to part 1 of my review of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition for the Nintendo Switch. I wanted to put this in 2 parts because Xenoblade Chronicles is a pretty massive game, and I never actually beat the original game. However, I did just finish the new epilogue because my best friend basically spoiled everything in the original game, so I'm going to let him do most of the talking for the Wii original, and this part of the review is going to focus on whether Future Connected is worth it for returning Xenoblade players, and the changes that have been made for this new definitive edition, because the 3DS version basically didn't change anything at all. So this is definitely a bigger step up in the changes department. So first, let's talk about the changes made to the base game before we get into Future Connected. So first off, when you're selecting arts that are position specific, like for example when you're using Shulk's backslash, which is more effective against enemies that are facing away from you, you now have the option to make an exclamation mark appear when you're in the right position. Because a lot of the enemies in this game, well, sometimes it's hard to tell where their front or their behind or their side is. So the exclamation mark doesn't exactly fix the problem. They can easily, dodge or turn out of the way, but at least it gives you a good indication of where Shulk is in relation to them, which makes the battle slightly easier. You also have 3 difficulty options this time around. However, they're not named difficulty options, but chosen as settings. So you can choose to toggle expert mode if you want the game to be harder, or casual mode if you want the game to be easier. If I'm not mistaken, I think you can actually choose casual mode and expert mode at the same time because they're in separate parts of the options screen. Speaking of options, there's a lot of them this time around, and I don't remember there being nearly this many ways to customize the Wii or 3DS versions. Just to name a few out of the staggering amount, you have the ability to choose between the original soundtrack or a remastered edition. You can choose to turn off voice acting in battle, but turn it on during cutscenes, and vice versa. You can choose to have the music all the way up, but the sound almost all the way down, with the odd exception of your character's footsteps, which are still there. You also have the quest tracker that was introduced in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 being incorporated into this release. So if you're really excited to get most of the side quests, like I was, then you are going to think that this is a godsend, as you now have different colored exclamation marks around the map to indicate exactly where you need to go to do the next part of a side quest. So even if you dozed off when the character was describing the side quest, as these are the only parts of the game that don't have voice acting, you don't really have to doze off. You just follow wherever the exclamation marks are and you could care less about the story. They also tell you ahead of time what rewards you're going to get. That was a carryover. But one thing that wasn't was that in Future Connected specifically, they tell you what level your character should be to adequately tackle the quest. Because most of the quests in the original Xenoblade Chronicles were fetch quests, whereas now there's a couple of them that involve combat as well. So it is really nice to know when maybe I'm not quite prepared for this. There's a whole bunch of other little quality of life improvements that would probably be too numerous to name, but one of my favorites is the addition of being able to have your gear for your statistics and your appearance be separate. Because in the original game, if you changed your gear, that would also change your character's appearance. And that wasn't really that great, because I like games where I get to choose what my character is wearing. So in this version, you have appearance and gear as a separate menu. So if you want to have Aerith armor, but you want Shulk to dress up like he did in Colony 9, you have that option. You also have the option to remove pretty much all of their clothes and just run around in underwear. And in the original game, if you did that, the game would heavily penalize you by making it so that you had no defense whatsoever. But in this game, now you can have maxed out stats while still wearing next to nothing. Not exactly practical, not exactly modest, but it's possible. And I think the vast amount of options and player preferences in this new edition are much welcomed. Another particularly favorite change of mine, and I haven't even talked about Future Connected yet, is the ability to toggle the exact path that you need to get to your next destination. This may make Breath of the Wild players throw a fit, but I am pleased to say that is really helpful. That instead of the obnoxious arrow that would appear above your character's head in the original version that would give a vague pointing in the right direction, and then a number would appear saying how far away you were, the larger the number, the farther away you were from the objective. Now on the minimap you can toggle yellow dots that point the exact step-by-step path that you need to take. In other words, this game, with its new difficulty modes, with its new Xenoblade Chronicles 2 incorporations, allow for this to both be more user-friendly and also less user-friendly, because you can also turn off most of the HUD so that the game actually feels harder. If you want, you can turn off the map, you can turn off item descriptions, you can turn off the exclamation marks that appear, as I did here, so if you want it to play like the original game, and overall it's a very highly customizable experience. Now let's talk about Future Connected. Now I don't have a lot of footage of this because I didn't want to spoil stuff, as I feel like even just showing this is a spoiler in itself. But to put it briefly, Future Connected is a brand new epilogue that takes place 1 year after the events of the original Xenoblade Chronicles. While it is possible for purists to skip the original game and just jump straight to Future Connected, if you haven't already played the main game to completion, this game is not going to hold your hand in the slightest. If you forgot how to do the battle mechanics, or if you were, say, not paying attention during a particular story beat, well, if it's relevant here, they're not going to care. They're just going to tell the story without relying on overt amounts of backstory or refreshing, like, say, the Ace Attorney or Harry Potter books might do. You're expected to know the story and the controls inside out and backwards, especially because Shulk and Melia are the returning characters in this quest, and they have all of their arts already unlocked from the get-go. So if you don't know how to use Shulk's maneuvers, then oh well. You also get 2 new characters, known as Nene and Kino, which are 2 Nopons that play pretty much like Reyn, I think his name is? Reyn and Sharla. I haven't actually tested this for myself, but I've heard this confirmed by several people. Melia and Shulk are basically exactly the same as you remember them in the main game. This is also very much a backseat for Shulk to take, as even though he was the protagonist in the main game, this time around it's heavily implied that Melia is actually supposed to take charge, as evidenced by when you start the game, the default setting is to have Melia as your party's leader, and most of the dialogue revolves around her. Shulk and the 2 Nopons are more or less there to give the scientific voice of reason in Shulk's case, because Melia is not a researcher, and in the case of the Nopons, to add a bit of lightheartedness when the story gets a bit dark. Now, this is nowhere near as controversial as anything Xenoblade Chronicles 2 tried to say, but every now and then the game is capable of pulling off some deep moments, even if they aren't nearly as impactful as the main game was. This is also significantly shorter than the main game. It should take you roughly 11 hours to beat the main quest if you follow the map to the T and don't try to do the side quests. However, I would highly recommend that you do try the side quests, as enemies no longer drop armor like they do in the main game, so instead all of your cosmetic upgrades are obtained through side quests. You also get experience points just for doing side quests, which is a carryover from the original game, but it's a lot more fun to explore the Bionis' shoulder than it was to explore anything in the original Xenoblade Chronicles. This is a beautiful set piece, dare I say the best set piece I've ever explored in a video game. And nearly every second I was trying to take a capture or a picture of the environment saying, wow, this is gorgeous. The glorious music also really helped. While there's a nice number of familiar tracks returning from Xenoblade Chronicles, there's also a couple of brand new tracks, and they sound just as good as, if not better, than the original score, and I'm highly shocked that they somehow didn't make it into the main game. That being said, it feels significantly better than everything I've heard in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So if fans felt burnt out by that game, you'll be glad to know that this is a significant return to how the series, at least on the Nintendo scene, started. And I'm really thankful for that, because I still have no desire to pick up Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but I just restarted a file on Xenoblade Chronicles 1, because I'm just like, okay, I'm rehooked. All these new features allow it to be much more accessible and easy, and I don't have to worry about overt amounts of grinding that plagued my best friend when he tried to play the Wii version. So overall, this is a wonderfully sounding, playing, controlling game. The only minor gripes I would have are the quest does definitely feel a bit on the short side compared to the main game, which is like 100 hours long. And a lot of side quests involve climbing up a mountain and jumping down from high heights. Uh, Playing Breath of the Wild a lot, I think I was a little bit spoiled by the ability to climb pretty much everything. And the jumping physics felt slightly off, but you'll be glad to know that jumping is actually never required to get through the main game, so you really only need to jump in the side quests. Nevertheless, I wish they would have taken a couple of lessons from Breath of the Wild's playbook, but overall, since this came out in 2020, I'm going to have to give this a 17 out of 20. While it's not the best open world game I've ever played, it's definitely a worthy addition to the JRPG genre, and I'm very thankful that Operation Downpour convinced Nintendo of America to port this game over to the States, even though they just used the European translation. I guess it shows that Europe does what America can't. Anyway, with that being said, thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for part 2 coming very soon, and until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and know that you are capable of creating your own future because God gave you free will. Bye.